I am filing a notice of intent to seek the death penalty. I do not take this decision lightly, and it is a decision I have made independently as county attorney, based solely on the available evidence and circumstances and nature of the crime.
All right, Jack Posobiec back live here, Human Events Daily. We're on with Liz Wheeler. And the more and more that I read about the twisted world of Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs, it reminds me so much of the story, the case was called the crime of the century, Leopold and Loeb. Leopold and Loeb were two American murderers in 1924 in Chicago. And there are several movies about this, one of which has Jimmy Stewart, Alfred Hitchcock movie. It's a great one. And the two of them were highly intelligent. They were highly successful scholastically. And yet they decided to prove their intellect and to prove how better they were than others, that they would kidnap and murder a 14-year-old named Bobby Franks, who they knew. And they were two people who were caught and had done this because simply they decided to show their prowess. Now, they were given life in prison. They were not executed. I believe they should have been executed because, again, in this case, they made this decision. They made this horrific decision to do this. And we know that Charlie Kirk was a believer in the death penalty, that Charlie Kirk was someone who read the Bible and said, this shows me that God has ordered the death penalty for those heinous crimes. And funny enough, or funnily enough, I suppose I should say, that their defense attorney was none other than Clarence Darrow himself. Yes, the very same Clarence Darrow from the Scopes monkey trial, a famous atheist in his own right, and chipped away at American justice and American capital punishment. And so we see a lot of similarities. We see because there was a lot of sexual activity and what they claimed was abuse, and they were in a homosexual affair with themselves. That's why it reminded me so much of this. And, Liz, when we look at the totality of all of this, Leopold and Loeb, that was 100 years ago, exactly 100 years ago, 101. And here we are 100 years later, and the only difference, I suppose you could say, is it wasn't just homosexuality, it was transsexuality in this case.
Yeah, I mean, the connective tissue there is godlessness, right?
Indeed.
Both of which require it in order to be a practitioner. Listen, Jack, I think one of the things too about the transgender ideology, we had begun to talk as a nation, not just in the conservative movement, about this thread of violence that is included in the transgender ideology. And I think it's worth noting how it applies to this case, too. I wrote a book 2 years ago about the assault on America's kids, and I noted that at the time, critical race theory was the thing. That was the topic. That was, young white children in school were being told that they were irredeemably racist because of the color of their skin. There was nothing they could do about it because of crimes or wrongdoings that were committed by generations ago by people who happened to share the same skin color. Young black children were being told that they're oppressed based on the color of their skin. There was nothing they could do about it. And this creates in children such an incredible self-loathing. Imagine being told that you're evil, and they're not because of anything you've done or thought or said or how you've treated other people, but just based on what you look like, based on who you are. Conversely, imagine what it's like to be told that you're oppressed and that you're never going to succeed based on just what you look like. This creates an identity crisis, and intentionally so in young children. And I call it the 1-2 punch. So children are being indoctrinated in critical race theory, and especially this applies to young white children for the purpose of this illustration. They have their identity torn down. They feel self-loathing, and that's the first punch. And in comes this second ideology, this transgender ideology that says, listen, you might have been labeled as the oppressor because of the color of your skin, and there's nothing you can do to redeem yourself from that. But I'm offering you this antidote. I'm offering you the opportunity, if you put on the mantle of the transgender ideology, if you reject who you are, reject your parents, reject your person, reject your God, reject your body, then you can be one of us. You can be one of the victims. You can be one of the oppressed, and you're no longer the bad guy. We will give you back your self-worth and your identity if you take on an artificial identity. And it served as this 1-2 punch to transform young people from just normal kids going to school, operating in society, to these radical revolutionaries. And both Tyler Robinson and Lance Twiggs are of the age that they would have been victims of this 1-2 punch, not just in public schools, but in society at large. That young white men are told that they're disgusting because they're white. They're told that they're evil, and the only thing they can do is reject their God-given biology and become something else. And what happens when they do this, the only requirement in order to go from being an oppressor to being oppressed is that you reject all objective reality, that you pay fealty instead to the Marxist ideology, and you have to sometimes be willing to give your very life to overthrow the oppressors who now want to genocide you as the oppressed. And what happens is these young people are not just mentally, ideologically brainwashed. They are now willing to physically carry out this ideology. It turns them into essentially kamikazes, these suicide actors, in a sense, for the Marxist dialectic that underpins the transgender ideology. And of course, that element exists. I know Tyler Robinson wasn't the one who was transitioning. He wasn't on the hormone replacement therapy, but he was engaging in sexual activity with someone who was. So at the very least, intellectually, he was captured by this ideology too, most likely.
No, there's no question. And I was just pulling up some other stuff on Leopold and Loeb, by the way, for folks who might not know. The Alfred Hitchcock movie is Rope, by the way, Jimmy Stewart. It's just fantastic. It's a classic. I think most of the film, or possibly all of the film, was done in one shot. Richard Loeb was seen as the dominant one, charismatic, confident, obsessed with crime as an intellectual gang. Leopold, who was the one who obsessed and idolized over Loeb. He was highly intelligent, IQ over 200 by some estimates, but became emotionally dependent on Loeb, deeply infatuated with Loeb, willing to go along with anything that Loeb wanted, and in their relationship, Leopold often deferred to Loeb's wishes, both sexually and in their criminal activities. Liz, I gotta say, I'm probably going to be going down the rabbit hole on this for the rest of the evening because the similarities are just so stark. And they're both 18 and they were 18 and 19 at the time of the crime.
Were they?
Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. I mean, that's pretty wild. I suspect, Jack, that if we, the public, were given access to, the accounts of Lance Twiggs and Tyler Robinson and said, like, listen, here's their online footprint, here's their computer, here's their phone, like, go nuts, find out what they looked up, what they read, what they wrote, what they watched, what they did. I suspect you would find trails that would lead you back to stuff like that.
Right, and of course, and by the way, like I want to be very, very clear about this, that I'm just talking about, this previous case. We're theorizing, we're looking at some of these leaks and asking questions. I don't know or have any evidence in any way to say that Lance Twiggs was involved in this. The evidence doesn't seem to show that. The evidence seems to show that in this case, it was not something that they planned together. It seems like it was something that Tyler Robinson, again, based on the evidence, that Tyler Robinson did on his own as a form of pleasing to Twiggs, as a form of wanting to receive praise, which would also fit in with being emotionally dependent. So he's wanting that praise. But again, being highly intelligent, right? They mentioned that Tyler Robinson was in an electronics program, an engineering program, that he was someone who was highly intelligent. As well as Twiggs himself had been a former gifted student, but they had both sort of dropped out of their respective programs. So you see a lot of the similarities. Only about a minute left. Liz Wheeler, thank you so much for doing the yeoman's work on this, doing the heavy lifting. Where can people go to get everything that you're going to be putting out on this?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jack. You can go to youtube.com/Liz Wheeler. You can follow me on X at x.com/Liz_Wheeler. And we have video on Spotify now. So if you go to the Spotify app and search The Liz Wheeler Show, we are on there too. And it's censorship free. So it's a great app if you're not able to catch us live.
No, that's absolutely incredible. And I know that a lot of people are going to be listening to this live. And I really do hope that this and that you share it with others, that you get it out there, because we know there's been a lot of questions about this. We have a lot of questions as well for those of us who knew him. And as we start to get answers, we can start to unpack the twisted and demented truth about what happened to our friend Charlie Kirk. And his family deserves that. And his kids deserve that. So that's what we're going to do. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, you have my permission to lay ashore.